Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders. This is the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I am delighted to be joined by a very special individual. His name is Lorcán Brennan, and he is part of Accenture's Ethics and Compliance function. He works as the Policies Oversight Lead for the organisation and also leads the Accent on Enablement group in Accenture, which focuses on disability awareness and inclusion, an absolutely critical subject. Lorcán, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Leila. Absolutely delighted to be here, and thank you very much for the invite.
Wonderful. So before we kickstart things, I know that we had the joy of hearing you at last year's Dial Summit, and it was just insightful hearing more about you personally and professionally. I wonder, for those that know you a little less than we do here at Dial, could you tell us a little bit about you, how you came to be where you are today, and perhaps, why you're so passionate about the subject?
Sure. Well, if I go back in university, I studied natural science in Trinity here in Dublin with the aim of going into environmental science and environmental science consultancy. Fortunately, when I graduated, there were very little jobs here in Dublin in that area that were beyond lab work. So at the time, IT was taking off in a huge way. And a lot of graduates were doing these conversion courses. So I did one of those conversion courses and then joined Accenture, or Anderson Consulting as it was at the time. And through my journey and career in Accenture, I would have been on the consultancy side for pretty much 19 years, working on client sites in health and public service, delivering large scale projects. I was a program manager. And then more recently, I switched over to an entity within Accenture called Accenture Commercial Services, which is based in Dublin. And that's where I moved into the ethics and compliance role. And in terms then of the accent and enablement piece within Ireland, about 9 years ago, my second daughter, Thea, was born and had a brain injury at birth and has numerous different issues like cerebral palsy and microcephaly, epilepsy. She's legally blind, but she's incredible. She wasn't ever expected to be able to walk, but she's running around. We engaged in extensive early therapy, and really it was Thea who inspired me to get involved in this space, because what I noticed as she was growing up was that there were great supports in schools for children with disabilities at an early age. That's been extended into secondary schools, but then they really just drop off the cliff face in a lot of situations. So I really wanted that continuation of support to go into adulthood, to have people with disabilities as functioning, contributing members of society for their sake, for their own mental health. And that's why I started. I want, when Thea grows up, I want it to be as normal for her to go into a company and get a job as it is for all the rest of us.
Well, what a wonderful story. Thank you so much, Lorcán. Not only yourself personally, because clearly you are impacting wider society in the role that you play now within Accenture, not just for your daughter to really pave the way, but also for others. I think it's absolutely exceptional. And, to your point, there being great support in schools, it's how can we make sure that that is ultimately, as you say, continued, and that we're removing what can often be some quite systematic barriers to success for all. And if I may just unpick a little bit about kind of
Sure.
the current role, because I know you're doing a huge amount with seen and heard a lot from Team Accenture on work and celebrations for everything from International Day of Persons with Disabilities through to actually really speaking out about this. Talk to us a little bit about kind of the current work and how you've interwoven your brilliant personal experiences with your daughter into the workplace and into the group that you lead.
Yeah, so at the moment, I think Accenture and many other companies in society were very much in a transition phase. You'll know this yourself, Leila, from the conversation around disability has transformed in the last 5 years in particular, and maybe really began in earnest if you go back 9 or 10 years ago. So we're still in that transition phase. So how we organize ourselves in terms of the Accent and Enablement team is around 4 key pillars. The first one is around awareness. That's huge. I think around disabilities, it really is one of the last unconscious bias pieces that we see in society. You don't, thankfully, you don't see many people going out being deliberately mean or horrible to people with disabilities. But if you ask that same person a question about hiring somebody in or working with somebody and having somebody with a disability on their team, then suddenly the bias kicks in. Will we be less productive? How do I deal with that person? I don't know how to deal with that person. And it's not necessarily coming from a bad place. It's genuine concerns and fears. So we have to build that awareness. 15% of the world's population have a disability. From a purely practical perspective, we are missing out on that whole, resource pool of people and what that different way of thinking brings to organizations. And we've seen a huge change in that over the last few years, as I said. So awareness for us is key, trying to drive that awareness, really set the foundation in to build all the rest of the programs on top of that. Then in terms, our other pillar, practical support. So we know that within Accenture at the moment that there are a lot of people with disabilities, but the vast majority of those are probably hidden. And unless somebody decides to self-disclose, we will never know that. But what we're again, and this is tied in with the awareness piece, we want people to kind of, if they're comfortable and want to, feel totally comfortable to self-disclose, ask for help, ask for support and reasonable accommodations, because then they're happy, they get the best out of themselves, but the organization in the end gets the best out of them. So there's a series of practical supports that we've put in. We also work with community. So disability organizations that are, in my particular group based here in Ireland, where we've reached out because we want to help those organizations feed the next generation of people with disabilities coming in to companies and organizations and the workplace. And then lastly, we have the recruitment pillar, because if we're really serious about this, we should be targeting organizations that specifically help people with disabilities in the recruitment space. We, Accenture, like everyone else, has we're an equal opportunities employer statement on their application forms. That probably doesn't mean a huge amount to someone with a disability who might be concerned about, would I be good enough? Are they interested in me? What supports do I get? So I think organizations need to be very proactive with recruiting agencies, with the universities, to go and say, we value everyone. These are the supports. If someone has a disability, these are the supports that we put in place to allow that person not just to come to a company like Accenture, but to build a career and build their life through the company as well. So those are the four main areas in terms of what we're doing to try and bring about change.
Well, I take my virtual hat off to you and Team Accenture for doing this around those really clear four pillars. And there's so much there that I would love to unpack. I'm going to start with the piece around awareness that you mentioned there, because it's easy to forget, or people say, oh, we're talking about this again. Actually, I often get that in diversity and inclusion, because it's sometimes seen as a bolt-on to the day job. And it's like, well, understand that entirely, yet at the same time, this is something that never goes away. It's an evolutionary process. Diversity, inclusion, belonging in all of its forms. It's like culture. It's living, it's breathing, it's sleeping. And if we don't continue to talk about it and keep the foot on the gas, we're never going to continually, move the dial on this. And I was interviewing actually Steve Ingham yesterday, who's chief exec of Page Group, and he was saying, from a practical point of view, 20% of the population will get a disability at some point in their lives as they get older. That is a enormous amount of the population, not just for those who have physical disabilities and Steve's in a wheelchair, but there's the invisible disabilities, of which some you have mentioned, and you touched on neurodiversity. I'm dyslexic. Many people have different neurodiversities, as well as also the physical disabilities, and you think that is just a huge amount of the population that are being marginalized and then not counted. And also, that's a customer base, that's society. It is, it's just unbelievable, and they all come in different shapes and forms. And to your point around practical support, which is absolutely needed to be able to back up and to remove systematic blockers and be more mindful ultimately about how we put interventions in place to allow this talent to thrive. That is absolutely key. There's never this one size fits all cookie cutter approach. It's a multifaceted viewpoint, and again, which is why I think it's so good that you're looking at all aspects. You're looking at community, you're looking at recruitment, internships, you're feeding the funnel upwards, yet you're also looking at this practical support piece and intervention piece, which ultimately breaks breaks that cycle.
I think you make a really good point as well around the sort of visible and invisible disabilities, because very often if a disability is visible, people make accommodations, but where it's invisible, may not be aware. So they might think, that somebody is not good at a job, or they might make presumptions about somebody. So that's another reason why we want to drive the awareness is foundations, and to create an environment where if somebody wants to, they can self-disclose, and then they get the support that they need, and they just become much more productive. We get the best out of everyone. But I also think there's a broader impact on the workforce. Is when you have a workforce that is trained to make accommodations for people, it benefits all of us. It just makes people more open-minded. It makes them take a step back and not rush into judgment about other situations, be them around disability or not. Very often, some of the, we have a situation where it's a workplace solutions, where if somebody can ring up and say, look, I'm visually impaired, can I get this piece of tech to help me? That's expanded now to the entire workforce. So even practical accommodations that you're putting for maybe a subset actually then can be expanded to benefit the entire workforce. So it's win-win in my view.
Absolutely is. And I love the proactivity around this and ultimately training people. As an example, our last summit, and well, again, our one that was more recent, the one that you did, we've evolved it each time. So closed captioning. We have across everything that we do, but again, then looking at that in different languages or preferences, if people actually would rather read the annotations and transcripts instead. All of that is absolutely key. And to your point, without asking the question or without training individuals, they may make a automatic presumption that someone, perhaps is not as able because it's not as obvious ultimately for them to say. And layered on top of that as well is all the intersectionality pieces as well, and the layers of differences. Again, with yourself being a very, very proud father as well, would we know unless we'd asked the question, or unless we had heard you speak so authentically and proactively about this subject because of a personal passion, that actually you were a father who had caring responsibilities and also had a daughter with disabilities. And it doesn't, to your point, always mean that, oh goodness, we're going to get less productivity. Actually, quite the contrary. These disabilities actually, I really believe sometimes are real superpowers, because when 100%. You don't have a certain capability, or I'll use myself here as an example, dyslexia, you kind of sometimes explain sometimes wrong words for certain things. You find your way finding other systems that you use in order to circumnavigate that issue, thereby creating new skills that someone who had those specific skills without the neurodiversity wouldn't have been able to do. And so actually it ultimately breeds this amazing amount of kind of innovation and talent that is what we need critically. And organizations like Accenture, especially being services organization, need in order to create and come up with these innovative new solutions.
And it brings different ways of looking at the same problem and different solutioning. In my experience, and if I look at it with my daughter Thea, but more generally across the board, if I could nearly sum it down to one word: resilience. Because people, especially people who were born with disabilities, but no, if you acquire them during your lifetime, it's the same. You need a massive amount of resilience to work around the disability. Exactly what you said there. How do I compensate for it? How do I get around that problem? How do I just, depending on the level of disability, how do I get up and push through? That resilience and determination are incredible traits to bring into your workforce. And I think it's in bucket loads, especially in the disability community. We see it all the time.
Indeed. And I'd love just to touch back on some of the recruitment piece that you mentioned in some of those pillars with Thea in mind, actually, if that would be okay. Is that actually,
of course.
When we look at graduate programs, and one of the reasons why I do what I do every day. And I didn't speak out about it actually for many, many years because I was too embarrassed. I thought I just wasn't good enough. I applied for all the graduate programs. I got a first class honours degree, but it didn't help me get a graduate job. Hence, I ended up going off working in town, running my own businesses over the years. But I kept it closed because all my friends were going off to work for these graduate organizations and, shiny blue chip companies, which is where I desperately, desperately wanted to be and had seen myself. But I look at the kind of, assessment centers and things like that that were in place back then, and they were all very, very similar, which denotes almost a, good, quote unquote, looks like this standard thing. Yeah. It looks like a cookie cutter replication of another person. If you don't meet that criteria, then you're suddenly classed as not employable or whatever, and I guess, when you talk about the internships, which I think are absolutely brilliant, because it's not all about degrees and things like that, whilst I do also value them at the same time. But then you kind of, looking at your daughter and the kind of, slightly tweaked intervention she may need for graduate programs and other things, you realize the system's not been historically set up for different individuals. 100%. I mean, what are your thoughts? And talk to me around the recruitment and internship piece and, I suppose your mindset when you were thinking about all these things as a parent.
Well, even going back, even before recruitment, and again, this is a journey. This is a real journey. You're 100% right, Leila, in that, we were a very monocultural company if you went back 15 to 20 years. That has changed massively in the last period of time. I put a lot of that down to the efforts of the LGBTQ community. Actually, they, in my experience, at least in Accenture Ireland, they were the first group to actively come out and campaign, and they really paved the way then for other marginalized groups to say, well, actually, what about us, and have the same conversation. But I think in terms of, if I think of Thea, her training began when she was 6 months old. I mean, she was on a harness on a treadmill because learning to walk, because they didn't think she would ever be able to walk. But as she goes up through the school system, as well as the practical supports that should be put in, there has to be almost mental health supports put in. Confidence training. You are as good as everyone else. I mean, you said there you got a first class honors degree and you still didn't think that you were good enough. There's something wrong there. So we have to look at the sort of psychological element as well and run that in parallel. In terms then of companies like Accenture and recruitment, we have to do, and I think we are beginning to, we have to reflect the society that we're in. We really do. It doesn't make sense if it's all, white male middle class people working as consultants. It has to reflect the broader society. And around disability in particular, we need to be going out to the universities. We need to be going out to the recruiting agencies and saying, we value everybody. And if you come to Accenture, these are the supports you get. But it's not a tick the box exercise. This isn't charity. We know what you are capable of. We know what talents you bring, what different ways of thinking that you bring to organizations such as ours. And we really value that. That message has to be pushed a hell of a lot stronger than it has been up until now. I mean, we ran last year, a neuro-diversity internship program. We partnered with Specialist Turn on that. And that finished in December, and we're kicking it off again for this year. And we've had a 50% retention rate of the interns, which is, that's pretty high. I think that might be higher than if I do inverted commas, the regular internship program. Now we're merging the two, but we're piloting this. So what we've seen, and you need to prove the point that this works. Sometimes some tweaks and adjustments are needed, but this works. And to do this, we are really missing a trick. So we need to be more proactive in our recruitment, but it goes further, it goes way back, it goes back into schools and the universities. Why are we bringing people into universities if we don't intend for them to get jobs? People with disabilities into universities if we don't intend for them to get jobs afterwards? That doesn't make any sense to me. That's a tick the box exercise. Aren't we great? We're doing the diversity box here. No, hold on. We've put all this investment in, and that's right and proper. Bring it to the next stage. This isn't charity, as I said. These are functioning members of our society who do add and will add, incredible things to our companies and our society. So I hope that answers your question.
My goodness, it does. And I'm having to hold myself back here from nodding furiously, agreeing with everything that you say, and not wanting to unpack every granular detail of this, because I think we could easily do another podcast in into itself around early education and the education system.
Yes,
ultimately, 100%. Because you're absolutely spot on when you say that we need to be starting earlier. I mean, how wonderful that there is walking 6 months old on a treadmill. That is just, I mean, it brings a tear to my eye for all the right reasons. I think, wow, that resilience, that determination, those skills that you would not have ingrained into you at such a young age if you didn't have the disability, that is amazing. But carrying it on into schools, if we were learning about all of these aspects as something that was just the norm, then imagine the mindset for the talent then entering the workplace, entering, schools, then respectively, universities or other extracurricular programs. It becomes more and more the natural path. And I remember, even in schools, picking just a subject off the top of my head here, I do not remember learning about different sexualities. I don't remember learning a huge amount, about, say Black culture or even Asian culture. But again, I'm very westernized. I was adopted by white British parents, but I don't remember a lot of these things happening. And so actually, if we started earlier and it becomes more this heartbeat of normality and this journey and evolution, as you say, then, there wouldn't be the need for such huge interventions at this point in time.
It's a really, really good point. I think if you look at anything, early intervention is the best. And if you were to take the sort of Machiavellian capitalist view of things about, just put it down to $1 or pound, British pound or euro amount, if investing, if for example, if I take Thea again as an example, if we had sat back and done nothing and Thea was in a wheelchair, wouldn't be able to do X, Y, and Z, we would be going to the government for much more supports than we have to do now. So because we got that early investment, better for her, obviously, but even from the state point of view, the state gets off because the state just gives us that early investment, but isn't necessarily responsible for any sort of support later on because she no longer needs that support, if that makes sense. And I think what you're saying about the schools as well is really important. There are supports there, but at least in Ireland, you have to beg for them, or there's no one coordinated person or group or office that you go to and say, this is the situation with my child or with me. What supports do I get that allow? It's not just about getting supports, but it's an investment. It's how I see it. It's an investment in that person to make them as independent as possible. And the more independent they are, the greater contributors they are to society. So I think, again, we're halfway on the journey, but there's still so much more. Recently in Accenture, we just launched a support call for carers of children with neurodiversity. They actually also has autism. It's a long list. And it was the common theme that people, who joined the call, because some of them would be parents of kids who'd just gotten diagnosed and they just didn't know what to do. They just didn't know where to go. There should be a sort of a social worker type system where, here's your situation, here's what we can do to help. And that will even just bolster parents in terms of being able to work through it. Because when you are a parent with a child with disability, there is a whole process of grieving and anger and a whole range of emotions that different people go through to process what's happened to their child. So there's loads of different angles and elements to this, Leila, but I think we're all moving in the right direction.
We're going to get in early, and so I'd love to do another podcast or some more content with you, Lorcán, because this is just
anytime.
Absolutely brilliant stuff. And before we move into a lightning round, I've just got to mention some pieces on what you've said there around investment, because it should be seen as positive investment. I mean, coming kind of right out there, looking at what's happening with kind of ESG, and S is being amplified now off the scale. You look at other huge global trends in, I know we've been talking about the war for talent for years and years and years now, but the great resignation, well, couldn't it be, the great retention here? Investment in people as assets for the long-term sustainable future is what we absolutely need to be doing now more than ever. This is not a nice to have. And I sometimes get frustrated with talk around aspects of diversity and inclusion where people presume this is some kind of charitable kind of, situation. You think, hang on a minute, it absolutely isn't. This is a strategic business priority because it's a reflection of society who ultimately are consumers in all of their forms. And so it is not just you should do it because it's the right thing to do, but it makes strategic business sense. And, as you so beautifully articulated in everything you've talked about there, from, government, state support, et cetera, wherever you may be, actually the whole thing is actually an ecosystem. Then, look at there, and clearly she's going to be an asset to any organization with that amount of resilience and tenacity. Well, think of the output and the productivity come from a talent like her and so many others. It's just, clearly for you and I, it's kind of like as clear as night and day. It's just, it's crazy that there are still people that don't see this. But I found this incredibly insightful, very, very, emotive and kind of passionate podcast. And I think, it's, 100% will this have inspired other people to absolutely understand how it fits into the bigger picture.
Well, hopefully, and at the end of the day, all of this, allows every citizen in our societies to be the best version of themselves. And that's not a cliche. It really isn't. And it's every person's right. And as you said, it is that investment, and we all benefit. We absolutely. I'm really looking forward, Leila, to the time. Maybe it's 10 years' time, but it's when that first generation of leaders come out with disabilities evolve, and they're in leadership positions. And I know there are people there at the moment in leadership, but when it happens more en masse, I think that's when we'll really see a transformation and the gaps plugged. And we're very much at the forefront at the moment on that journey. But I think we are going to see great things in the next decade. I'm very positive about it, I have to say, and it's exciting.
Oh, you are so right. You are so right. And what with these next generations of leaders coming up through the ranks, if nothing else, and probably maybe the most challenging thing, or at least we're about to find out and become first-time parents soon, which we're
congratulations.
Terribly excited about. Yeah, a couple of months left, so any advice much appreciated.
That's a podcast in itself.
Yeah. But what are we going to tell our kids when they say, what did you do as a leader, mummy, daddy, what did you do as a leader to impact things in society that you could have made change for? And goodness me, from all I hear from friends and colleagues is kids have no filter. They will ask you, they will hold you to account. So you better
yes. Oh yes, I have many stories about that, but no 100%. And actually I think you're when you do have children, your frame of mind can absolutely change. You really do start to look at the future in a different way. Everyone looks at the future, of course, but I think you do start to think of, well, when I'm gone, what will the world be like for my children? They will be adults. And exactly, you're 100%, you're dead right. What did I do to make it better? I think if anyone listening to the podcast, if that's a call for anyone to step up and start to do, it doesn't have to be, Guinness Book of Records stuff. It literally can start with a conversation. If you're in a company and you're not doing anything around disability, go to your leadership and say, I think we should. I'd like to look into that. And it can start small and it grows. And that's what happened in Accenture. We were a small group and it's grown and grown, because as you get momentum, more people get interested and want to be part of it. But it's really, really important that, and we can all make, without sounding too, like I'm pontificating, but we can all make change for the better. And we really just have to decide, yeah, I'm going to do it.
Absolutely.
It's as simple as that.
Absolutely. I'd love to give a little plug here for your group. How many have you got in it at the moment, and why should people join?
Well, within our group, and we have a committee which conjures up all sorts of images, Village Green Committee, all that kind of good stuff. But they're fantastic. But we have 10 people in that group, so it's fairly small. But then in our wider group within Accenture Ireland, for example, there would be just under 500 people in the wider group that we would update and send newsletters and stuff out to, and then we make contact with the entire company every now and again with our initiatives. So it is a small group, but what we do is, I try to lead in a very organic way. As you can imagine, Accenture can be, it's a big consultancy company, has our ways of doing things. My advice for anyone starting such a group is actually get people who are willing to do stuff, who are interested in the topic and are willing to follow up on what they start, and then allow them the space to come up with ideas and run with those ideas. And you can achieve a huge amount by doing that, because I think sometimes people can be afraid of the work commitments. If I start something like this, it's going to take over all my. Actually not. If you organize it in a way that people feel they can bring their ideas to the table, and you literally say, well, would you like to run with that? Okay, report back and we help you in any way. It's very organic, but it's worked really, in my experience anyway, I feel that's worked very, very well, as opposed to a very regimented project delivery way. That's something the way I would have delivered projects for clients a few years ago. I deliberately consciously say, no, don't run it like that. Step back, allow people to bring their themselves to the meetings, bring their ideas. And it's great. It's really good fun. And we have a very committed following of people who are very eager to help us out in any way. It's fantastic, really fantastic.
Super. Well, it sounds like it's absolutely fueled by passion and intent. So if you're listening, if you're part of Accenture, if you're not part of Accenture, find out about your disability or neurodiversity employee resource group and get involved. We've heard from Lorcán that actually every voice matters, even if it's a very small thing that is done. If it's a tiny conversation, or if it's a nudge in the right direction to leadership or someone else, you never know who you could be touching by having a conversation and kind of just saying, look, want you to get involved. So great reason. And before we run out of time, I'd love to, I've got time to ask you at least one lightning round question. I'll give you maybe 30 seconds or thereabouts to answer. Starting with the most difficult one first, actually, and that is, what would you say is your secret to success, or is that one?
Oh, yeah. At the risk of repeating myself a little bit, I think you need a group that have a genuine desire for change. Absolutely. And surround yourself with people who have the same goal. Let things happen organically. And when you are going, don't give up. Sometimes when you pitch an idea, it might be shot down quite early on. But I have a little thing that let's make it so they can't say no. And what I mean by that is create a logical argument for what you're trying to do, but listen to any concerns that the group or leadership or whoever it is you're pitching to have, like genuinely listen to them and then address those concerns. And then you make it harder and harder and harder for them to say no for programs that you want to do. A very quick example, if we have time, is during the pandemic, Accenture employees, like many companies, use laptops and get given laptops. And then after a certain period of time, you get your laptop replaced. Now, they were going to be recycled, but we wanted to give those to charities that supported disabilities. So we set up a working group in the AOE group, and there was global policies that prevented it for all sort of data protection reasons, all that kind of stuff. But we brought in our legal team and we worked through those problems and kind of addressed all the concerns. And we donated last year, Accenture Ireland donated just under 400 laptops to not just disability groups, started off with disability groups, but we expanded it to youth employment groups, schools in impoverished areas. And the feedback that we've gotten, Leila, from that program, a simple program, it has transformed lives. And especially in the pandemic, where people they may not have had laptops and they weren't able to go into their schools or their disability support groups. They were completely isolated. And if they couldn't afford a laptop, they were really, really isolated. So these groups, or that one program has transformed many lives. So I would say to people, make it so they can't say no.
That is superb advice. I absolutely love it. And I can tell that you're a very creative consultancy background individual with the whole creative problem solving, because that is absolutely brilliant. It speaks to everything we've been talking about ultimately, is you're listening to all of the issues, and then you're basically making your way through the problem solving in order that you get to the desired outcome. And what a great desired outcome that was, to donate all those laptops. And ultimately, in things like that, as you say, transforming lives, improving social mobility, for those that wouldn't be able to afford, simple things that we take for granted, like laptops. It's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And I know, and working with lots of large global kind of blue chip organizations, there are often lots of bits of red tape because of the size of the organizations. And so, actually being persistent, tenacious, taking some leaves here out of Taya's book is what we all should be doing. And finally, personal question, actually, I wonder if you could go back in time. Mm-hmm. And you could give Lorcán advice. Maybe he's doing kind of doing his studies, thinking, oh yeah, there'll be loads of jobs in this for sure. What advice would you give to your younger self or someone else who's kind of embarking on early steps of their career?
Oh, that's a good question. That is a good question. Do you know what though? I think your development in life, it all leads you to where you are at a given point in time. So it can be very different. I find this difficult to answer because each stage in my life, I've learned something. And even if something hasn't worked out the way I thought it was going to work out, it's either sent me in a new direction or I've learned something really valuable from it. I suppose if there's one piece of advice, in one sense, I would say be bolder. I think earlier in my career, I was just the type of person who, wants to work hard, do a good job, keep my head down type kind of thing. I thought that was enough, and that probably wasn't enough. You probably need to, get yourself noticed a bit in terms of career development and promotions and stuff like that. So just be bolder and just sort of, it's probably the one thing. But at the same time, there's no regrets as such. As I said, I think every step in your life, every period of your life is a step towards the next one, and brings you on life's journey. So there's not one thing like don't do that, Lorcán. I wouldn't say that to myself, but yeah, maybe be bolder and don't sweat the small stuff, to use that awful cliche. But that takes I think a lot of time in the adult world to kind of go, you know what, that really doesn't matter. It might when you're 25, but then when you're older, you're kind of going, yeah, no, that there's bigger stuff going on that I need to care about. So.
Great answer. Very philosophical, actually. Similar to myself, I think life is a journey, and I to an extent do believe in fate. Things happen, sometimes for a reason. You wonder why they happen at those particular times, but then you realize actually later on, oh my goodness, that was meant to happen for all of these wonderful reasons, and that is why. But to your point, and this is filtered throughout the podcast, is life is a journey. Learning is a journey. It's an evolutionary process, as is diversity, inclusion, belonging, the things that happen. And ultimately, what we can bring to life and bring to the workplace is doing our absolute best and knowing that our voice and the actions we take make a difference. And those, lots and lots of differences, leave lasting legacy for good, and ultimately to our future generations of leaders. And that is what it is all about. But Lorcán, it has been an absolute joy having you on this podcast. I know that we'll be calling on you again for many things, and please do let us know at Dial how we can continue to amplify the voice of the enablement group within Accenture and all that you are doing, because it is absolutely brilliant. And I think also some great actionable tips here as well, in terms of the awareness, the pillars, the practical support, the looking at other partners and other ways to support what you're doing, as well as looking at different phases of that, almost the employment maturity curve, I guess, of internships, recruitment, retention, programs that can really help you retain what will be your biggest asset, or what is your biggest asset, and that is ultimately the people. So thank you.
Not at all. Thank you so much. It's been really, really interesting talking to you today. And listen, thank you for all the amazing work that you do at Dial. It's at the summit that was fantastic last year. Keep it up. It's so important. It's organizations like yourself that will drive us to where we want to be as a society.
Thank you, Lorcán. That is so very, very kind. And for everyone who's listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast today, thank you. You can download the podcast on all of your favorite podcast apps, be it Apple, be it Spotify, inside our Dial Global app, which is Dial Global Network, in the App Store. And you can also check out Lorcán as well. Make sure you check him out on LinkedIn. You reach out if you're in Accenture. If you're not in Accenture, reach out. Super passionate individual individual, make sure you get in touch. If you've been affected by anything at all during today's episode, please do not be a stranger. Make sure you have the conversation. And if you would like other ways to access this podcast as well, the team or I would be more than happy to help. We can give you transcripts. And also, if you've missed any of the learning points, you couldn't scribble fast enough because there's so much great stuff coming out, then don't worry. They'll all be there in the podcast show notes. So you can get a quick view on summarizing some of those great learning points. So until next time, thank you ever so much. Visit us at www.dalglobal.org/podcast, and we'll see you again very soon. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.